Welcome to the Doctoral Consortium. I'm sorry I cannot be there in person, but I did want to send some presentation and I hope you will enjoy that. The title of my presentation is What Will Make You a Great Marketing Scholar? As you plan your journey to start as a doctoral student, become then typical faculty, promotion tenure comes, become more senior faculty, either become an administrator like a dean, director, whatever you do, there is a career path. And all of us who have gone through that career path have learned quite a lot about the do's and the don'ts of how do you become a scholar. So this will be a synthesis of that knowledge and framing it properly. The first thing we are finding is that all of us have less time and multiple demands. For example, Professor Naresh Malhotra is busier after retirement than before retirement. And that's not uncommon. Most academic scholars who have achieved excellence have become well respected, work harder and harder even after retirement, partly because they are passionate, they enjoy what they do, and they now have the freedom to contribute to a global level as opposed to a local level. So what are the three things we do as academics? The first is research, other one is teaching, and the third one is service or leadership. I have added words to each one of them and talk about how to balance these three activities. I will make a recommendation that it's not just research, but are you doing newsworthy research? In other words, is your research going to go beyond a technical journal, less than 1,000 people reading that, and will it actually be such that a top national or a global media calls upon you and publicizes your research? That's newsworthy. Similarly, we can all do teaching. But can you do teaching in a memorable way so that somebody in the class remembers you forever, either your style in which you delivered or a specific framework that you taught? In my case, all my students always remember the rule of three, which is unusual. In the old ways, in the academic doctoral programs, they will remember the theory of buyer behavior no matter what. So how do you make your teaching memorable? And a third one is that we all have to end up doing service work at the institution because we are into committees, for example, or for national organizations as volunteer workers. But can you provide service that's beyond just servant leadership into something that is transformational to the organization that you serve? Balancing these multiple demands, research, teaching, and service, will require absolutely immediately learning how to do time management and how to do stress management. In fact, even though you have no time, take a class on time management. And even though you are highly stressed out, learn how to reduce the stress, because this journey is not as simple as you think, is the message I wanted to give you. What I find fascinating is that unlike in my generation, it is no longer enough to demonstrate teaching excellence. We think as faculty members our role is teaching, but then we are teachers, like high school teachers, maybe community colleges. You may not need a doctorate for that. Doctorate is designed so that you do more than teaching, in fact, in lieu of teaching sometimes, and that is to come through becoming a research scholar and provide leadership. Some of the best PhDs in other disciplines do not work at universities. They work in research laboratories of world-famous laboratories like Bell Labs, for example, IBM Labs, Xerox Labs, or whatever they are, and they have patents, and they are as good as scholars, and often they have a joint appointment with a top research-oriented university, such as an MIT in sciences, for example, California Technology Institute, Caltech as it is called, Berkeley in the social sciences, whatever turns out to be the case. So you have that very interesting dimension that you have to think about, that it is more a research leadership, research excellence, and leadership excellence. Finally, if you think you are busy now, you will be busier after your doctorate and busiest after your tenure and promotion. So welcome to our club. Now, how do you become newsworthy in your research? Typical paradigm we always talk about in research is that is the research rigorous, which is what we teach you. We give you all the scientific approach of how to conduct research so that the evidence gathered is not biased either by the observer, the experimenter, or the researcher. Evidence is not biased by, for example, the instrument that we use, for example, whether it's a survey instrument or a laboratory instrument. Evidence is not biased by the context in which we do, so it's generalizable. We teach all that stuff. We have doctoral seminars after doctoral seminars on scaling. We have seminars on techniques, data analytics, all the way from multivariate statistics, nowadays to social media analytics, for example, and of course, designing the right set of settings, whether it's an experimental setting or a natural observation setting or a field experiment. The design says we rule out other explanations. All of this stuff is sort of the ABC of research from a rigor viewpoint. You can be very rigorous but totally irrelevant. I call this esoteric research. So what? Does it matter to the society? It may have a great publication in a top super micro academic journal, but so what? So we are now raising questions. Is your research also newsworthy? Which means, does it have impact on society? And unfortunately, in marketing, we think everything we do should impact only the marketer. In other words, a company, chief marketing officer, shareholder value. But a lot of the stuff we do is a lot more meaningful to the society at large. And therefore, I'm always advocating, can we do research so that the mass media, like a CNN of the world, for example, actually publish it? It's happening more and more. There are some examples recently I've seen in consumption behavior, fake news versus genuine news. It's all about what we do, but it's newsworthy. Newsworthy means it's very relevant to the practice, but also relevant to the policy makers and relevant to the public opinion by and large. Pew Research Foundation does fantastic research, as Gallup did. And every print media, every social media uses their content to disseminate more. So are you newsworthy in your research? Even though our domain deals with a major aspect of human behavior, which is consumption, we are not newsworthy. And the only exception probably is Brian Wansink, who is at Cornell, not in the business school, but the School of Agricultural Sciences. And he does experiments on nutrition, typical behavioral economics or consumer psychology that we did. When you have a small portion, what happens when you have a large portion, large plate, small plate, nutritional foods, etc. And he actually is quoted all the time in top broadcast media. Unfortunately, anthropologists, psychologists, and economists have discovered consumer behavior. They always talk about social behavior, something else, but not consumption behavior, but it's becoming mainstream, which means our competition is not other marketing scholars, but actually social science scholars. We, of course, have the whole notion of behavioral economics, and they're getting Nobel Prize. And it's all about consumer psychology. The kinds of work that economists do today, which is the behavioral aspects, is what I did remember in my early journey 45, 50 years ago. And I have publications in Journal of Marketing Research, for example, all those experiments we did with housewives on the one hand or students on the other hand. It's Psychology 101. Similarly, brain research, heavily used in other disciplines, all about consumption. Cigarette smoking, hard liquor, its impact on the pain relief, the drug dependency. It just goes on like that. And fortunately for us, we are in a domain where marketing can be for a better world. And here are some quick examples. Low income consumers. Have we understood the psychology of low income consumers? Or we have basically said that whatever the upper income people will do, lower income will do. We have never understood the context, the constraints, the motivations, the aspirations of low income consumers. If you just take the United Nations definition of low income, World Bank definition of low income, that economy is at least $5 trillion, highly unorganized. It is about to become very much branded and organized. Low income people also want branded quality products today. Marketing and economic development, marketing and social development. Our tools and tactics are very useful to the societal problems, not just the marketer problems. And the two big areas are healthcare and education. Every nation is struggling with these two, what are public services by and large. And of course, since social media is becoming so mainstream and has a direct impact on marketing by definition, because marketing is all about communication. Can we measure the side effects of social media on the consumption unit, which is a family, a household? Is the consumption likely to become from the household to the individual personalized consumption? Are we living like a roommate family, in other words? And what are its implications both for marketers, the practice, but also for policymakers? Because the laws may be organized around a family as a unit, and when the family doesn't behave like a family, what happens with social media? That's just one. Digital addiction is another side effect. It's all domain of newsworthy research. My second point is about teaching. How do you make your teaching memorable? And I find very simple, memorable teaching arises through experiential learning, not through cognitive learning. People remember experience-based learning more than simply reading the formula in a book, for example, or reading, in fact, a paragraph of a great novel, or reading marketing theory books, or whatever they are. I often in my classes say, how many of you remember your undergraduate, all of the subjects that you studied? 100%, nobody raises hands. 90%, nobody raises the hand. Ultimately, at about 10%, handful of people will raise hands. Then I say, all right, how many of you remember your first kiss? 100% of the people raise their hands. Experiential versus cognitive. Laboratory-based, hands-on, which is what engineering does, which is what medicine does. We don't do it. We don't bet on the stock market. If you are finance, you have to play with the money in the stock market. That's the real world. So experiential learning is a very key dimension in your classes as you teach. Textbook knowledge is now becoming more and more online knowledge, because textbook, the day it is published, is obsolete. At one time, textbook was the only source of knowledge creation. Somebody had a framework, they made it into a textbook, like Samuelson's economics book. Today, textbooks are more like an encyclopedia. Everybody's knowledge is synthesized, put into chapters and frameworks. But textbooks, the day they publish, it's such a laborious, long process, is obsolete. So today, learning has to be more online knowledge, because it's so contemporary, it is immediate, it is real. By the way, I find best way to learn is to teach. Interesting. And I have a Chinese saying that I like very much. When the student is ready, the teacher will show up. Remember that. And you can learn from anybody. The best sign of a scholarship or a teaching is that you are obsessed about learning yourself. If you just enjoy repeating the same PowerPoint presentations, borrowed from the textbook publisher, same simulation game that you are using, you are not learning. And the only way you can impact the class is to learn, and the learning comes from passion. interestingly. I have a new framework I have created because I studied this quite a lot. What are the three ways you become a great teacher? And I find the most common ingredient among great teachers across all disciplines is enthusiasm or passion. Second most common turns out to be empathy. The good teacher puts themselves in the other side, the student's shoes, listens to the body language, not just the verbal language, understands the ethos of the room, has a caring attitude, has a compassion, as it is called. So, are you passionate? Do you have compassion? Are very important. And the last one, of course, is expertise. Do you know your subject matter? But expertise is the lowest contributor to our great teachers. It is turns out to be passion and empathy. And a new framework I have created. In the old days, teaching was all about 3 hours of learning: reading, writing, and arithmetic, because we were going from a feudal society, agricultural society, to an industrial age where we needed the literacy. But today, teaching has to change, or learning is changing to 3 I's of learning. Learning should be interactive, integrated, and individualized. Interactive is happening by flipping the class. I don't have to lecture in the class. I lecture my video, put it up on the internet or in the classroom, such as a Canvas as a platform. All my students have to watch whenever they can watch. Come to the class, however, for discussion. Who says cases are the only things that we can discuss in the class? You can discuss in the class on any problem of the situation or your own video lecture. So flipping the class is a very key activity. Integration means you are integrating something like English and science. There's something common between mathematics and English, we know, which is the structure, the syntax. Both have protocols, rules. Can we teach that? What's common between finance and marketing, for example? And the instruction going forward or learning is individualized in a large class. You may have 100 students, 50 students, but how do you make learning in a way each one student learns at their own pace and differently? That is the new algorithm. That's the new way of teaching. Make teaching experiential, as I mentioned, and use as much online knowledge as possible rather than rely on the textbook. Third element, of course, is leadership. How can you become a transformational leader and therefore change the institution, not just you? The old model used to be that you will do local impact at your institution, local chapter of a marketing association, whatever it is, and you followed what is called servant leadership. I'm here to sacrifice my time, talent, and treasure for the sake of the institution. Today, it is thought leadership, not just servant leadership. Can you actually think ahead of time about the future of the organization, the institution, and shape or move the institution from where it is to the new world? And can you have a global impact? In other words, are you participating in global associations, membership associations, as opposed to only local membership associations? Are you able to travel quite a few places, have a network of people that you can relate to outside of your own organization? I find that we are in the ivory tower. Are we in the ivory tower by isolating ourselves rather than go out in the field, feel, see, touch? Vast number of consumers in the world have still not benefited from technology breakthroughs and product innovations. Even today, more than 50% have no running water. Well, quite a few people have no water. Electricity is not 100%, something we take it for granted. If anything else, the only democratized technology is the digital products, such as the cell phones. Everything was so expensive the way we designed that the 85% of the population couldn't even afford it, even in the long term. How many people have flown the planes so far? Very small percentage. These technologies are there for 100 years, 50 years, 30 years, but have not become democratized. So that's very important. And I always raised a question why we don't have marketing Peace Corps. There is a Peace Corps, which means you voluntarily want to learn about other countries. You go out and serve them. Churches do all the time. Why can't we do as a marketing discipline scholars? So just to summarize, academic scholarship is a 24/7 mindset. Unlike teaching, research is neither time nor location bound. I've always said, in a laboratory experiment, rats don't sleep. So why should the scholar who is a researcher on the rats sleep? He or she shouldn't be sleeping either. Learn to manage time and stress, very important. Happy home life is key to productivity. Please make sure that in your ambition to become an academic scholar, you are not jeopardizing your family, whatever family definition you have. Compartmentalize multiple tasks for efficiency. I learned that over time. I do this thing at this time, and that task cannot encroach my other time, whether it's between teaching, research, whatever it is. Compartmentalize every activity that you do and contain within the time, because it can always expand the boundary of time. Use the 5-4 principle I learned from one of my senior colleagues at University of Illinois, who was a giant in his field, but his desks were clean always, not a single paper. And I asked him, Robert Ferber was his name, Bob Ferber, Bob, how do you do it? And he said, I never wait for the deadline. Don't postpone. I had this bad habit of waiting for the deadline and always missing the deadline in reviewing the papers, in reading materials, whatever it is. So first in, first out accounting principle is very important. Don't agonize. World is not perfect. Marketing is a contextual science. It is more statistics than math. There's always a probability that you will not be able to explain everything in life, no matter how clever your analytics models are, design is, for example, the theory that you have, you always will have unexplained variance, as we call it, and there is no way you can achieve perfection. So you basically go for a level of excellence that is quite good, but it is not zero defect. If you worry about consequences, you will be paralyzed. I've always find that if I think about the outcome, when I make a presentation on the stage to an audience, when I write a paper, I get a typical stage fright. I've forgotten. I just don't worry about consequences because I've generated enough self-image and a self-strength, self-confidence to say, I have my standards which are better than the world standards. If you have your own high standards, the world will respect you and the world will admire you for what you do. I want to add one more thing for about a minute and a half. As doctoral students and future scholars, you are in the most noble profession ever created by the world. You are in the business of shaping human life through your teaching, through your research, through your service. So if you take a grain of wheat and make it into a loaf of bread, the value add is only 3 times. This is the agricultural value add. If you take a rough diamond and polish it, the value add by a good diamond cutter is about 15 to 20 times. But if you take a human being, nurture, mentor, educate, give perspectives, the value add is infinite. As scholars, our job is to make ordinary people extraordinary and take a pride in them, as we do when we generate our own doctoral students. And if they do better than we do, we take a pride. He was my doctoral student. She was my doctoral student. But this can be done on everybody in the classroom. In fact, we don't even know when we are teaching, when you will be teaching, how you will impact on somebody who after 20, 30 years will say, you know, that little thing you mentioned in the class made all the difference in my life. And that is the sign of a great noble profession. I feel very strongly about this one because I'm a living example. I'm a refugee from Burma. When Japan took over Burma in 1940, we became refugees in early 1941. I come from a merchant class which does not believe in education. I had gone back to my native country, India, and would be a merchant running a shop, just like we see every place in Africa. And I'll be less than high school educated, and I'll be earning maybe $1,000 a month at best. I'll be happy, but I don't know my own potential. My sisters got more potential out of me. Society got more potential out of me. Every institution I attended nurtured me. I had a great set of people. And to me, my becoming a scholar is accidental. In fact, I wrote a book about this one at the request of many people, and I titled it The Accidental Scholar because all of us have potential. And my view is that if I can do it, anybody else can do it. Thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful time at the Doctoral Consortium.